I've been more and more attracted to René Girard in the past year, I would say, just because of everything that's happened. And I've been seeing that his analysis of the situation is really one of the wisest in terms of the way that he interpreted what's happening and intersectionality. I mean, he passed away, I think, around 2010 or maybe a bit later. He talked about I saw a quote of his in 2007 where he talked about the machine of Antichrist, which is ramping up. And he saw exactly what we're seeing. He said, it'll be infinite victimhood looking for infinite scapegoat. And so it's like this perpetual wheel of victimhood, which is looking perpetually for more and more scapegoats, like almost like a self-devouring machine. And so we're seeing it. The solution is, like, I know you dislike when I push it too far, but the solution is the image of the scapegoat being the murderer and the victim at the same time, right? Identifying with Christ and identifying with those that killed him, identifying with the capacity to exclude and the reality of also being excluded to a certain extent. Like those two things together, if you can integrate them properly and not in a weird disorderly manner, can help you have compassion for those who are excluded, but can help you also understand that you are one of those who do that all the time.
Yes.
Like you're always doing it.
But this is what I meant. I think there's power in Girard's argument. I've only read the one book, and I'm not completely. At the one I saw, Satan Fall Like Lightning. But the idea that you can explode if you'll allow me to use some of my terms, you can explode the cultural cognitive grammar of scapegoating, and that the Christian mythos does that. I thought that was one of the most powerful arguments, and it's a new argument, as far as I know, one of the most powerful apologetic arguments for Christianity that I had heard in quite some time. So I think that is a good point that you brought up. But it does. I think it's situated within this larger task again, which we keep coming back to, of trying to get to a place where we can simultaneously accept faith and virtue. Because one of the ways in which you can, right? One of the ways in which you can address people's thoughts and feelings is by inspiring them to aspire to virtue, rather than trying to eradicate. You can try to inspire the aspiration to virtue. And this has been, to my mind, a very, very successful strategy. Where I've been talking a lot recently, and Akira the Dawn did the meaning wave about it, about stealing the culture. And I actually use Christianity as a primary example of that. That Christianity doesn't try and overthrow the political structure. What it does is it steals the culture. It creates an entirely different culture from the bottom up. And then, because the problem, to my mind, what the French Revolution shows is you can radically transform the state, but if you don't transform the underlying cultural cognitive grammar and normativity, nothing is fundamentally going to change.
Yeah, you just change the ones who are holding the reins, and
you circulate the elites.
Exactly.
Right. And so, whereas what Christianity does is it builds a new civilization. Buddhism does the same thing, right? It builds a new civilization. Islam does the same thing. It builds a new civilization. And so that brings us, and we don't have much time, I suppose, but so that brings me towards the third point, which you said you sort of despair of knowing what to do. And I'm wondering if you, I'm sorry, I realized I might be daring the preposterous thing of proposing some sort of a Christian thing to a Christian, which is a ridiculous thing. But I gave you all of those examples, and to my mind, of the idea of, well, isn't the response to do as much as we can to engage in building the next culture? And that sounds preposterous, but a commitment to that kind of thing seems to me to be the most responsible response to the depth of the situation we are in right now.
Yeah. No, I think so. I mean, I would say on a personal level, love God, love your neighbor is a pretty good thing to live by in the immediate reality, and not abstract categories. To deal, to love the people that you encounter with, to see in them the face of God, is something that will transform at least your life. It's harder in terms of a social responsibility. For sure, myself, the way that I frame it, that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. What you said is that I'm trying to help people see the grammar of culture, or see the pattern.
Exactly.
And of course, one of the things I've been emphasizing the most is the importance of the margin, and talking about the margin in a balanced way, so that you neither have the desire to, because both sides want to eliminate the margin. Everybody wants to eliminate it. They want to eliminate the margin either by making it the same as the center, by integrating all the marginal aspects and making them equal to everything else, or by eradication, or by cutting it off. And that's the real problem with it's the question we had during the first wave of violence of the 20th century. You had two sides. You had one side which wanted to create an equal utopia, and one which wanted to create a hierarchical utopia that cut off the margin, that burned it off. Yeah. And we're facing the same, it's like we didn't deal with it. We're facing the same problem now. And we're seeing the one side now, we're seeing the side that wants everything to be equal. But I always tell people that when the Nazis came to Germany, they were on the verge of a communist revolution. It's not, the pendulum doesn't move in one direction.
No.
The pendulum swings, and it's a scary thing to watch.
Well, but this is part of the way in which, again, the way in which this lack of a dynamical nuance in thinking. So, Leo Ferraro and I talk about this idea that you in living systems, and right, you see opponent processing, and I've argued, right, and that what an opponent processing means, this is the way you deal with trade-offs. And we've been talking about trade-offs all the way through, right? You have opponent processing, like your parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. Like the sympathetic nervous system is biased. It tries to interpret everything as a threat or an opportunity, and it arouses you. And the parasympathetic system is biased, and it tries to interpret everything as a signal that you should relax and calm down. And their biases work in opposite direction, but they're functionally integrated together, because that's how you get the most self-corrective system. Mm-hmm. And what we're supposed to have, and you can see this in Dewey, right, is we're supposed to have opponent processing. But what it's devolved into is adversarial processing.
Yeah.
Right? And this is the eradication idea. It's a zero-sum game. I've given up the idea of self-correction. I've given up the idea of commitment to a process that you and I, even though we disagree, we can commit to, like you and I do in dialogue. We have disagreements, but we see the potential that we can correct each other in valuable ways that we mutually appreciate, right? There was that commitment. And that commitment to that process has been lost. Like the fact that most Americans are more distrusting of the opposite party than they are of foreign threat. Like, what the heck does that mean, right? What does that mean to you? And so the adversarial, eradicate the other, destroy the other, zero-sum game mentality, I think has made the process, I think, is broken.
Yeah.
I think the process is broken. And so I don't know, I don't see how, I mean, and Layman Pascal and others, they disagree with me on this. I don't know how to work within that in a way. And so that's what I mean by steal the culture, that I don't know if working within that machinery is a viable strategy. I think the strategy has to be, Jonathan, I was at a conference 2 weeks ago called the Movement Summit, and there's all these communities of practice springing up everywhere, or trying to integrate mindfulness and movement practices and discourse practices, and so many of them. And and these people, and they all want to talk to each other, and they want to network, and it felt very different. It was neither the revolution of the left or the law and order of the right. It was orthogonal to that. It was these people trying to seriously, time and talent and money and energy and commitment to the cultivation of wisdom in a deeply alternative way of being. And to my mind, that's where, and I know you think it should be given a particular Christian slant, but I also think you're charitable enough to include other people of good faith who are willing to work with you. I think that's where the answer to the more difficult problem lies. I think there is stuff actually happening right here, right now, culturally, symbolically, existentially, that is where the difference that is needed is starting to be generated.
Oh, but I for sure agree. I think that the
Oh,
seeds
good.
of
I'm glad to hear that.
like a way to see it is like that this is horrible because it has bad implications, but like the seeds of the next world will appear in the current one, right?
Yes.
Like
Yes.
they're just hard to see. You know, the little sprouts are hard to see because everything else is burning in the forest, right? So it's difficult to see the seeds as this is kind of breaking apart. And I mean, I'm curious as to see how all of this will be integrated. I do again, like, you know, we've talked about this before, right? So we're not going to come to a conclusion, but I do think that there is a need for a narrative cohesion. And I do think that until something happens in the West, it's still the Christian narrative. So I don't see a way out of it, for at least, you know, I don't see a way out of it. So, but I do think that the questions that people are asking, and that the desire for wisdom and the desire for transformation is one which will bear fruit. It has to, if it's done with sincerity and done, you know, in a desire for transformation, it will bear fruit.
Yeah. And the point I'm trying to make is, thank you for saying that. And you know, from my part, I don't ever claim to have a foreclosure argument against Christianity. I always say that I do not have such a thing. But what I was trying to emphasize is there's not only sincerity, there's depth in like what's going on here. It has the appreciation for humanity and complexity. That's what I'm seeing in these people in this movement. Of course, we're all flawed human beings. I'm not painting some utopic vision, but I'm talking about, you know, a real possibility, and the acknowledgement that I think it's in existence. I like your metaphor for all the ways it's fraught, but I do like your metaphor of the seeds. I do like putting the two together, that the burning of the forest actually fertilizes the seeds in the way they need to be fertilized. And perhaps you were alluding to that, and your wry smile.
Yeah, but it's not fun. It's not fun. It's not pleasurable.
No, and it means death and suffering.
Yep.
And I have kids, and I don't want this. But I want, and what needs to happen are not always the same thing.
Yeah.
The whole point about the metaphor is we can't win by playing the game. That's right. My way of trying to understand what it is to not play their game and to shift over to a totally different game, to shift the culture.